Hey, it's Jeff Zito, and welcome to another episode of Celebrity Jobber. I encourage you to check out some of our former episodes. Former Major Leaguer Adam LaRoche or John Oates from Hall & Oates. D.A. Damon Amendolara from CBS Sports Radio in New York, and Kevin Cronin from REO Speedwagon. That episode just hit 1 million downloads, so please go back and check out some of the past episodes and rate, review, subscribe. We'll read some reviews here on the podcast. And this is a pretty cool story, let me tell you. When we talk about a series of events or sometimes a single event, life-changing event, which took you from a regular Joe to stardom, our guest this week definitely has that moment. And I can't wait to get into it with him. You know him as the 6'5" black rapping cowboy. And there's a few of them now, but this guy was the first. And he performs with one of the biggest country bands in the world, which would be Big and Rich. What was his first job? What did he do before he started touring with Big and Rich? And what was his big break? We're about to find out. Episode 17 of Celebrity Jobber with our guest, Cowboy Troy. Troy Lee Coleman III. So that's you.
Yeah, what's happening?
You know, man, I'm just trying to find out a little bit about you because, you know, everybody knows that you're a 6'5" black rapping cowboy. And, you know, there seems to be, I should say, not a bunch of 6'5", but there's a lot of black rapping cowboys, you know, these days. It's become a thing. You were the first. You were the original, the OG.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of cool to see how things have progressed all these years later. I mean, you know, early on, it was one of those things where I remember back in the 90s when I was still in college and going around and rapping at, you know, clubs and bars and stuff like that. And people would look at me like, dude, you're rapping, but you're wearing a cowboy hat and jeans and you got the buckle and the Western shirts. What's really going on with that? And I said, well, I love country music, but I love to rap too. So it's just one of those things. And now here we are, fast forward all these years later. It's still cool to see that.
Man, and how did you, I mean, look, that the two genres, I mean, you're responsible for mixing them. You know, you're responsible for doing that because that was never a thing before. And I mean, growing up in Texas, I would imagine it'd be, you know, kind of hard for anybody to get away from country music. I mean, that's the thing there.
Yeah, well, you know, for me growing up listening, and I started listening to Charlie Daniels and Jerry Reed and Roger Miller, you know, all these years as a kid growing up here in Texas. And then, you know, as I got older, I started listening to rap. And I was like, you know, some of that rap stuff kind of reminds me of that song Devil Went Down to Georgia by Charlie Daniels.
Yeah.
Or, you know, you listen to songs like When You're Hot, You're Hot by Jerry Reed. Or you listen to songs like Dang Me by Roger Miller. Some of those sing-songy rap lyrics kind of tend to come out. Back then they used to call them recitations.
Okay.
You know, and, you know, if you listen to 16 Tons and What Do You Get, Another Day Older and Deeper in Debt, those kinds of older songs, you know, Big John, Big Bad John, stuff like that, you know, those songs had kind of a recitation to them, and it was a rhythmic, lyrical delivery, and I thought it was cool. You know, people may have done some things where they had a song or two on their records or whatever, but when it comes to doing an album start to finish, top down with all country instruments, my first major album, Locomotive, was the first album to do that.
That's incredible. And tell me a little bit about growing up, Troy. You grew up in, you were born in Victoria, Texas. Is that where you grew up?
Well, I spent, you know, born in Victoria, yes. Spent my childhood in Fort Worth and my adolescent and early adult years in Dallas. Went to college at the University of Texas down in Austin. So, you know, it was an interesting time for me. I mean, you know, listening to bands like ZZ Top and Def Leppard and, you know, like I mentioned earlier with some of the country artists and then, you know, some of the rap artists that I was listening to at the time with Run DMC, LL Cool J, and some of those groups, and it was just a really cool time. And I think it was fun to incorporate all that. As a kid, you spend a lot of time watching Hee Haw and Dukes of Hazzard, and I never really thought about those shows as being country shows, but even though they were, looking back, but as a kid, it was just entertainment. I thought it was something fun to watch.
And tell me a little bit about growing up in Texas. Tell me a little bit about your mom and dad, your family. Did you have a family business? What did your parents do?
Well, I spent a lot of time. It was interesting. Both of my parents worked, so I was a latchkey kid, throughout, elementary and middle school. So once I got to about third grade, I was walking to school, and then I'd come home from school, either walk or ride a bike home. And then once I got home, I'd call my folks, hey, I'm home, just letting you know. But I spent a lot of time watching TV. But home life was awesome. Both of my parents, great parents. My mother was a funny lady. She was hilarious. You would have enjoyed having a conversation with her, and she was a great cook. Pops is he's a funny dude sometimes when he wants to be, but Dad, even to this day, Dad is still pretty stoic, and every now and again he'll kind of let loose. Now that, my sons are old enough to kind of have those conversations with him, he'll kind of be laid back a little bit more. But yeah, growing up was really cool. It was a good time for me, and really enjoyed it. My dad was a music major, so there was music always around.
Okay.
And my mom, enjoyed music as well, but she had different kind of tastes. Dad liked a lot of jazz and R&B and soul, and Mom, some of the records that were hers were kind of some of the doo-wop records, and and some of the cool, really cool vocal groups and singing groups, Sam and Dave and the Spinners and some of those, artists like that. So it was a cool time, especially with music in the house all the time.
Yeah, so it seems like music was a big part of your family. So that was definitely, an influence for you to get into music?
Yeah, I really didn't think about it as a kid. I just knew it was always a constant. So, but yeah, looking back now, it's pretty obvious that it was going to be some kind of, factor in my adult life now. It was just always something that was always there.
Well, tell me a little bit, Troy, about what you were thinking about, like when you were younger. So say, when you're going to college at Texas, I first of all, I would think if Mac Brown was the head coach of that football team back then, he would have found you and walked up to you and tried to get you on that football team because a 6'5" guy probably sticks out on campus.
It's really interesting as a kid, and that would have been cool to have played football at Texas. That would have been really cool. But as a kid, by the time I got to the point where I was really thinking about what I wanted to do collegiately, I started out looking at different types of engineering. And it was one of these things, I guess it was the summer after 8th grade, and I would write letters. Back then, we'd have, take a pencil and paper, you'd actually write out a letter. And I'd write letters because I'd talk to my folks, both my parents, college graduates. They were like, let's think about what you're going to do. So I'd sit down and I actually wrote out letters to these different colleges. I mean, big universities about, hey, I'm in the 8th grade. I'm kind of interested in looking at your engineering program. Could you send me something? Blah, blah, blah.
Wow.
I remember this. And I remember one day I got this, I'd get these catalogs in the mail. And I thought that was really cool. I'm like, wow, I got catalogs. I'm getting mail now. and it was like, okay. And, UCLA send you something. And I'm like looking at this, man, this is really cool. Dad, look what I got. I got this catalog from UCLA all the way from California. And it was cool as a kid. And the older I got, and I was good at math, but I didn't realize how much math was involved in engineering. And the various types, I was either looking at, electrical or civil engineering, all of these different things, everything requires a lot of math. And I was decent at math. I was good at math up to a point until it started making very little sense.
Right.
But, I was like, yeah, maybe I'm not going to do that. Maybe I'm going to, maybe I'm going to be a comedian, because at one point I thought about doing, I guess it was my senior year of high school. I was like, yeah, I'm going to be a comic. That's going to be fun. I'm giving the jokes around, and my buddies at the time are laughing at them. I'm like, okay, I can do this. And then one time we went to this pizza place in Dallas, and it was like a stand-up comedy place where you get pizza and all that stuff. We went one time, and I'm like, you know what? I'm not as funny as I think I am. So I kind of scratched that off the list. Then I went off to college, and and when I got to college, I was like, I think this might be something that could work, because I started DJing frat parties, and I used to go around and hang out at the bars and clubs, and I'd get up and rap with these folks. And I had a buddy who was a DJ at a club, and he'd let me get up and rap over break beats, is what they call them.
Right.
Instrumentals and stuff, and I'd do that, and then sometimes if they would play just whatever your top 40 rap song was at the time, I'd get up there and I'd jump around and I'd either lip sync, on the stage at these clubs or whatever. It was really weird to describe it, but it was something that you had to see, but it made sense when you were in the room. And I would do this just about every weekend, no matter where it was, whether it was a rap club, rock club, dance club, country bar, wherever it was. And I always had the cowboy hat on, the jeans. People were like, okay, all right. all right there, guy. All right, we're watching, we're looking at it. And it didn't really make a lot of sense until after I graduated and I came back to Dallas. And, I started doing the same thing. I'd, get up and rap at country bars and, whatnot. And people were like, man, that's pretty cool. The bands, I made friends with the bands, and they'd let me get up and perform with them. Because, back in those days, the first 45 minutes of the hour or of the set, if the band was playing, they would be playing their traditional covers of whatever popular country songs were at the time. And then it got to the point where that last little bit of the set, the last few songs, they play a rock cover or a rap cover. Or
okay,
like that.
Right.
And so they bring me up for that. And that became kind of a thing around Dallas and Fort Worth, mostly Dallas, and in Arlington and some of those areas in the Metroplex.
What happened, Troy, between Dallas and Nashville? How long of a gap was it between when you ended up in Nashville and meeting Big and Rich? How did that story happen?
All right. Well, I met John Rich in summer of '93. He was playing in Lone Star before Lone Star got a record deal. Back then, they were called Texas C because they were all from Texas, but they met in Tennessee, so they called the band Texas C. So summer of '93, John and I meet. He was playing in a bar I was hanging out in. We became friends. And I told him about what I was doing with the rap and the country. He's like, what? And I was like, yeah, hip hop, blah, 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 blah. He's like, what? And, he's like, yeah, the country rap stuff, And it didn't make, because that was kind of the early iteration of what you have now. And he's like, what is that? Okay, cool. We stayed buddies and kept in contact all these years later. And then in '99, he introduced me to Big Kenny on my first, one of my first trips to Nashville. And the interesting thing about it is that in the meantime, I had been rapping and doing all these things at the bars and clubs. And I had a normal office job at that time. But then one of my first trips to Nashville, I was like, this is a cool place. This is a cool idea. I think this would be fun. So eventually, in '01, I decided to turn in my resignation at my job.
What kind of job was it, Troy?
I was working in human resources at the city of Dallas.
Okay.
And because I had to make a living, so
sure.
And it was something I was good at. So it got to the point where I said, okay, I'm turning in my resignation. They're looking at me like, what? Because they thought I was going to do well there, and I was doing fine, having a good time with it and working well. But I decided I wanted to go to Nashville because I had recorded my first bit of music, my first 3-song EP in 2001 called Hip Hop Hysteria. And by then, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go to Nashville. I'm going to make a name for myself because, you're going around bars and clubs in Dallas. They're like, okay, but, well, if you're really going to do something, you need to go to someplace like Nashville and kind of make a name for yourself there for people to really take you seriously.
Were they trying to talk you out of this, Troy? I mean, you have a career going with the government, human resources, like you said, pretty good gig, office job, doing well at it. And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, I'm quitting. I'm moving to Nashville. I'm going to be a big star. I mean, was your parents supportive? Were your friends like, you're crazy, dude, think about this?
Well, everybody kind of like, family was like, okay, you might want to wait on that. Don't quit your job yet. Just do it bit by bit. And then it was more like some of the people that were local, that were friends locally in Dallas were like, yeah, I don't know, man. You gotta go to Nashville if it's going to work at all, because people here aren't really taking you seriously. I'm like, okay, all right. So it was one of those things that you just kind of have to make the decision. And so I went and made a decision I was going to do that. And after about a year of driving and flying back and forth between Dallas and Nashville, it fizzled out. It didn't work out too well. So I got back to Dallas and decided I'm going to get me a job. And then my other job had been filled, so I wound up getting a job selling Western wear at Cavender's Boot City.
Okay.
and did that for a while because I knew the material. I knew the stuff because I was always shopping, buying clothes there. And so I ended up getting a job there. And then in 2003, I started working in Foot Locker. And I got a job at Foot Locker. I still have my Foot Locker jersey with the name tag on.
Do you really? Oh, that's great. Yeah. That's great.
I still have it. So I did that. And in the meantime, John and Kenny had gotten a record deal. Big and Rich got a record deal, and they had invited me to make an appearance on that first album that they were going to be on Warner Bros.
Wow.
And because they knew what I was doing, and I had been going back and forth and doing appearances in Nashville too, so people were starting to know a little bit about who I was through Big and Rich. And I went to Nashville, made the appearance on the record, then went back to Dallas to go to work at Foot Locker again. Stayed there and worked for like a year. And then one day, spring of 2004, I get this phone call. And you're not allowed to have your cell phone with you on the sales floor. So it was in the back.
Right.
Actually, I had it in the back, and then I see that there's a voicemail. And it's just about my lunch break. So I go and sit out in my car. And at this point, it was one of those things where I was like barely making ends meet. My vehicle had been repossessed, and I was literally driving a small, car. I was driving a 1998 Kia Sophia.
Oh boy!
Yeah, it was a tote the note used car lot.
Right.
Oh, and I'm sitting in my car, and you still had to crank the windows with the handle.
Right.
And I'm like sitting there, and I'm listening to this voicemail, and it's from John Rich, and he's telling me, hey, man, we got offered to go on tour with Tim McGraw.
Wow.
And I was like, man, that's so cool. So I called him back, and he's sitting in the car because they're doing radio interviews, and he's sitting in the car on the way to another interview with Big Kenny. And I'm just like so excited for the both of them. I was like, man, that's awesome. Congratulations, man. Because I'm thinking when they come through Dallas, I'm going to get to go see my buddies sing with Tim McGraw.
Yeah, you're going to get backstage. You're going to meet Tim McGraw.
And then all of a sudden, I was like, congratulations, guys. It's going to be awesome. Can't wait till you guys get to Dallas and come see the show. And they're like, no, dude, we want you to go with us.
Oh, man.
And I'm like, what? And so at that moment, I didn't really know, should I start bawling or should I start yelling? Because it was like, really? You really want to take me on tour? And they were serious. And, I had just gotten married at the time, so I'm like, let me ask my wife. But yeah, that sounds cool. And I literally had just gotten married, so, not long before then. It was actually 8 months before that I got married. So I asked the wife, and she was kind of like, what? What, really? Are you serious?
Right.
I'm like, yeah, this will get us out of debt and all that, because we were trying to get by. And so went on tour, and summer tour turned into the fall tour. And the fall tour turned into a record deal for me.
Wow.
So, and my first record came out in 2005. So it was my first major record on Warner came out in 2005. So it just turned into that. But I kept my Foot Locker jersey with me for the first year. I'd keep it in the closet on the tour bus to remind me of where I came from, because
yes,
it would serve as a reminder. Like, if you mess up, you got to go back to the mall,
right,
and sell shoes again.
Troy, man, tell me this phone call. I mean, that's it. That's like, it's usually a certain series of events, I like to say, that lead up to people's big break. But I mean, this phone call was a life-changing phone call. I mean, can you take yourself back to that moment? I mean, do you have goosebumps? Did you feel like you were going to pass out? Could you believe it? Did you think they were playing a practical joke on you?
I thought they were serious, but I was stunned also at the same time, because all these years of, writing my own rap lyrics and, jumping in and guest appearing with all these other bands and sitting in with all these other bands and stuff for all those years. And then to finally say, hey, I'm actually getting an opportunity to go on tour. That was a huge, huge deal for me. And it felt like all of the work that I had put into at that point was coming to fruition. And I'm like, this is going to be great. This is going to be so much fun. But it's also kind of like, a really, really difficult situation, because there's a lot of pressure. You go from being in local bars to being in amphitheaters.
Right.
And then eventually getting up to stadiums, and arenas. The last gig that I had as a solo artist at that point, I was the opening act for the two opening bands.
Right.
I got paid $25 for that gig.
Wow, man.
And it was only as a favor to a buddy that I got the gig anyway. Because my buddy's like, hey, man, this guy's trying to make it. And they go to the guy up there, and I'm like, and they give me the opportunity. And I had my music. I was using backing tracks burned onto a CD at that time.
Right.
So I get to the venue for sound check, and I've already told people I'm going to be performing there. And I go to the sound engineer, hey, I got my CD, and blah, blah, blah. And the guy's like, well, we're not that kind of venue, man. It's like we got the soundboard and all this and that, and, it's not like a DJ kind of a deal. And I'm like, oh, no.
Oh, Jesus.
And they're like, well, maybe you're going to have to go and you'll have to go and go to Guitar Center, or I forget, Mars Music at that time.
Right, okay.
So I had to go and buy a modular CD player and bring it back. And then, I brought it back, and then the guy hooked it into the mixing board, and then I was able to perform.
That gig actually cost you money. You didn't even make $25 for that gig, Troy. Probably cost you $30 for the CD player.
Back then, it was like $80.
Oh, my gosh. Oh, geez.
Didn't make any money. But, I had all these people that were coming. The lights were still on. They were still stocking the bar while I was there.
Wow, man.
Performing. So it was, but I remembered that day. I remember that event.
And you're going from that event, like you said, to stadiums. I mean, was there ever a stage fright situation? I mean, look, you're in a club and there's, maybe 100 people there, maybe to see in the opening act, maybe more, I don't know. And then you're going to a stadium of 50,000 people. I mean, did you have a little bit of a breakdown the first time that happened?
No, because I had that shirt hanging in the closet, knowing that if I messed up,
that was
I'd
it.
Go back to the mall. Here I am looking at, the first show of that Tim McGraw tour was June 11th, 2004, in Virginia Beach, Virginia, at the amphitheater there.
Wow, man.
And sold out 15,000, whatever it was. And I'm like, man, don't mess up.
This is it.
Don't forget the lyrics. Don't mess up. And it worked. And here we are all these years later.
Man, what a story. And it's around the same time. Is that when Save a Horse, Ride a Cowboy kind of comes on, and Big and Rich just kind of blow up to the next level. And now it's not opening for Tim McGraw. It's having your own headlining shows.
Yeah, I mean, it's a cool thing. It's a cool thing. That first summer we were out with McGraw. The next summer we were out with Brooks and Dunn.
Oh man, unbelievable!
And after that, Big and Rich was, headlining their own shows, and they brought me along with them. So I was excited about that. So yeah, man,
what a story! What a wild ride, and incredible how you kept that Foot Locker jersey with you all these years, just to remind you what you were doing before this all happened. And if you messed up or things didn't go your way, that would be where you'd have to go back to, and you use that as motivation to keep it going. It's incredible. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
And all these years later now, just like bigger than ever and still doing it. With Big and Rich, Cowboy Troy. Do you remember your first job, Troy?
My first job was taking phone orders from Rainbow Ticketmaster. Back then, it was called Rainbow Ticketmaster.
Yeah, I remember. I bought plenty of tickets from Rainbow Ticketmaster, and you'd have to sit there on the phone and get a busy signal and keep going and keep going. And eventually you'd end up getting your tickets over the phone. And that was wild how things were done. Now today you just pick up your phone and you click a button and you got tickets.
Yep, that's it. Yeah, back then I was taking phone orders.
Wow, how old were you back then?
18.
Okay. Oh man. Tell you what, Cowboy Troy, this has definitely been a lot of people. Everybody that's famous, everybody that's somebody that you know them from something. They all have a story. They all, came from, we're just all regular, everyday, average Joes. But I think your story, so remarkable, so incredible. And, I hear that about John, how John Rich is the kind of guy that remembers his friends and kind of, brought his friends along for the ride. And I think that's it's pretty cool.
It's awesome. John's a great dude.
What an incredible story. Not all luck either. I mean, yeah, he had a friend who didn't forget about him when he struck it big and rich. But, Cowboy Troy also had something that John Rich could identify. And man, he was right. Basically, with this one guy, created a whole new subgenre in the world of country music. And I think that's pretty cool. Talk about jobs. First job was at Ticketmaster, when you'd have to dial up to purchase your tickets over the phone back in the good old days. Lands a gig with the government in Texas as the HR guy. Then started working at Foot Locker. Couldn't make the ends meet, got married, and that phone call that changed his life. And when he got that phone call from John Rich, he just thought, hey, great. I'm proud of you guys. You're on tour with Tim McGraw and you're coming to Texas and I'm going to go backstage and meet you. No. We want you to go out on the road with us. And that was the beginning of what is now Cowboy Troy. Awesome story. I don't know what Troy would be doing if he didn't get that phone call from John Rich. But I definitely don't think he'd be working at Foot Locker anymore. I think he'd be a chef somewhere. Just go to his Instagram, Cowboy Troy Global. This guy looks like he knows what he's doing in the kitchen. Well, there you have it. Another episode of Celebrity Jobber. Once again, please rate, review, subscribe, and listen wherever you pod. I'm Jeff Zito. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week on another episode of Celebrity Jobber.